Where's the music coming from? There was once a land in which all of the creatures were born with a non-physical limp. Now, in such a place, you should realize no one can learn to walk properly relying on the game leg. And yet, men here attempt the same as regards understanding and their natural mind. From our piggyback stack of facts, fact. Only the simple believe that they're persecuted. Fact. Only the simple are persecuted. It's easier to hit an elephant with a single red bullseye painted on him than it is one covered with electronic schematics or mathematical formulae. This is why so many seek for the ultimate refuge in the acquisition of knowledge, yet why those so unperceptive to do so fail to therein find such. And a lad asked his dad, "Does that mean we should just give up?" And received the reply, "To answer you properly, I would have to know what it is you have in mind to give up." And after the flash of the initial shock had waned from the old man's response, which was so often the case in their conversations, the kid glowed to himself as he thought, "Ah, my dear papa never gives as much as an inch." One day, whilst in the momentary grip of some peakish feeling of guilt, one man stormed out at life, "Hey, don't point your finger at me!" And this caught life so off guard that it then accidentally stuck him in the eye. There was once a race of now extinct men whose motto was, "Leave well enough alone," but who never got a clear grasp of just what constituted well enough. Oh well. A man once asked, "Why does man think there's such a big deal about thinking anyway? No one ever talks about what a big deal breathing is, or digestion, or elimination. So why the talk just about thinking? You know, if I was just a little smarter, I'll bet I'd find something fishy here." As part of our continuing coverage of alternative sciences and other realities, there is a recent story from one which says that they have now made a final determination as to the single root cause of all psychological problems: the mind. That's right, nothing other than the mere existence of the mind. It's items like this that make these reports from other worlds so interesting, don't you think? I mean, stories about things that could never happen here. In their efforts to escape the hounds, some foxes came up with the idea of disguising themselves as hounds, while the extreme few amongst them conceived of dressing up like fox hunters. Simple people are simply fooled. The more sophisticated, even more so. Two guys talking, and first guy says, "Ordinary people wouldn't recognize something original if it bit them on the ass." And the second guy said, "Yeah, I know what you're pointing at, but you could also say that in a way they do recognize it, and that's why they feel they've been bit. 'Tis a poor mother's ear whose son will not, when necessary, rip the hearing aid therefrom." Come along, Hubie, don't you be listening to things like that. Each man is born with two clocks to tell him when time is running out. The first one he doesn't hear when it goes off, and the second one he does, but by then it's too late. Don't you just love it? What? Yes, that too. To try and get even for not being more conscious than he was, one man decided to start believing that it was not possible. Of course, if he had really wanted to twist the blade, what he should have done was to go ahead and experience greater awareness a couple of times, and then mostly never do it anymore. And then all the time think about how he's not doing it anymore. Now for our cartoon feature of the night. A slick mystic's pitch should be, okay, I'll teach you how to not suffer for, say, $100. So how much is it worth to you for me to teach you how to suffer even more than you do now? Oh, there's drugs that'll make you smarter, drugs that'll make you dumb, drugs that'll make you sleep, and drugs that'll make you run. There are drugs that'll give you visions and drugs that'll make you blind, but there ain't no drugs in the whole wide world that'll strip the shit from the mind. No, that's no job for mere pharmaceuticals. That's a job for, well, something else for sure. By the way, you and your viewers might be interested to know that for a most reasonable small fee, we can send you the correct conclusions and proper punchlines to all of the leave us dangling out in the air type of items so often read on the show. Cows and sheep are in a collective dance and know it not, and in one sense dance all the better for it, whilst men are in one similar to the beast and in another also, but in not knowing of the second one, men are not the better for it. If the deaf could hear and the dumb could speak, then who would play the parts of the deaf and dumb? Huh? And now a brand new feature entitled, The Trouble with Questions. The trouble with questions is that if you answer one, you may answer more. Be sure and tune in next time when we'll be introducing yet another new segment, this one entitled, Keep It to Yourself. If we set aside for a moment all physical ills and difficulties, then just where is the basis and origins of human suffering? Don't like to think about it like that, do you? And why is that? The teacher one day told the class the following story. A king once sent word to a reputed mystic who lived up in the mountains high above the castle that he would give the wise one anything in the world he wanted if he would tell him the secret of life. The conclusion of this story is contained in the pop-up book you'll all find on the shelf under your seats. One day, one man finally tracked life down to a dusty crossroads. And as they sat there, the man clenched his hands to his breast and said to life, I am so full of questions. And life thought, I'm not so sure that's what I'd have called it. Yes, a new, more intense, mystical version of the well-known legend of the great croaker sack and all the many bounties that would not therein fit. Of course, this is the cleaned up title. A small creature once went into a large animal trap. To get the food put there as bait at the opposite end of the open door. But due to its light weight, was able to pass over the mechanism used to trip the closing of the door without doing so. But after eating the food, it looked around and suddenly realized its precarious position. The creature, now on the far side of the device across which the weight of its original passing should have tripped and closed the door, became frozen with fear and could not even attempt to exit the trap, being held captive now simply by the awareness of what could happen should it try to leave. Does anyone find this story sounding a ring similar to the situation normally found regarding the captious conditions between what a man has become accustomed to thinking and the difficulty of exploring areas new? A civilized man's form of something new to worry about. They want to dig up the parking lot next door and plant a forest. Whoever first said, if it's not one thing, it's another, sure had the mind in mind. The only way to stay alive after the normally ordained age of death, maturity, is to continually be striving to give new birth to yourself. Life gives everyone life and 20 years of free education. After that, it's up to you. Either living death, that is routine comatose consciousness, or it's up to you time. While rummaging through the ancestral archives, a boy stopped at one spot and asked his father, "What was our family motto once? Give up." To which his elder replied, "Because that is what we once did. Way back when we were a normal brood." And once again the lad was warmed by the knowledge of just how far his particular lineage had strayed from the well-worn genetic path. To play the mystical game requires two, yes, a minimum of two people. First, you must have someone who says that they are a mystic, and then at least one other relatively warm body who will say that they believe that the first guy is a mystic. "Geez," mused one fellow, "but we're not all the rest of human affairs that simple." Ah, my good man, but they are. "Hi, want to dance? Thought you'd never ask." "I know, but until I did, there was no dance." Ah, my good man, how simpler can it be? Why not take a lesson as regards your attitude toward your own natural thinking from the world of commerce, wherein, if a manufacturer has a product of no exceptional quality, they'll often label it special edition. The speaker to podium took, and so addressed the waiting audience. The simple give too much emphasis to the body and not enough to the mind, while the more sophisticated get it the other way around. And if you think there's a third possibility to all of this, you're right, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And someone in the crowd was so offended by this turn of events that they hurled up onto the stage the apparently unconscious body of a local marriage counselor. Although it was impossible to be absolutely certain. A man once sought out a mystic and asked him, "Is it what men don't know that disturbs and destroys them?" And the wise one replied, "Not so much that as it is what little they do know." And the man went, "Oh," and left. There was once this species of creatures who could only be captured by you talking to them about yourself and them listening thereto. There was once a chap so disoriented that he mistook his mind for some sort of creature. Only the simple believe that life is a myth, a metaphor, an allegory. Those who know life know that life is life. And you could say, well, what else is there to know? But yet, it can take a lifetime for even the most attentive to fully fathom this. In the non-physical realm, being well has nothing to do with wanting to be well, any more than does a real mystic to those who say that they're a mystic. A man noted, "I do not enjoy killing insects who set upon me, and neither is their biting of me motivated on their part by any search for enjoyment. They simply do as they must under the circumstances, and I no less." Anywhere there is duality, there is conflict. Anywhere. In one fashion or another, ordinary minds see the situation as being somehow unnatural, while the more conscious know better. The head of one mystical school announced that his motto was, "Sleep sucks." And someone said, "You're speaking metaphorically, right?" And he replied, "Sleep sucks." In the beginning, those who want to be more conscious have little interest in life but that. But if they persevere, their horizons can expand in ways never previously imagined. There are three possible stages of a man's development. It begins with the natural, then to the learned, and potentially to the mystical, which totally transcends the first two. And a brief revisit to an earlier noted health question. trying to solve the problems you think you have in life is not any part of the mystical quest. Lifeless systems can produce only lifeless results. One way you can distinguish between those of ordinary intellect and those of a more conscious bent is that the former want conclusive answers to their questions that are not too conclusive. See, that's why mystics have so little real interest in sleep and death and stuff like that. And now for the curious case of one man who for many years was concerned over how poor was his memory of the tragedies in his life, only to eventually begin being glad that it was not any better than it was. Curious. According to one legend, of even more dubious validity than ones I usually relate, there was once a mystical school which, after it had taught its students fully how to see life objectively and without the effects of any personal feelings, would then instruct them to, and I quote, "Go on out in life now and tell them what you really think about them." The last time I told this story, I was swamped with inquiries regarding where one could find a school such as this. The simple worry a lot, and they've got a lot to worry about. It's rumored that the head of a certain mystical school is quite upset over stories being spread around about him by some of the students that claim he does go to sleep at night. Every time life just about had this one man cornered, he'd commit suicide again. Recently, a viewer wrote, well, it was me, wrote and asked why I only talked about things I wanted to talk about. And inasmuch as the question is much too obvious and self-serving and far too beneath me for me to answer, I thought perhaps, at least tonight, I could afford to respond in part to demands of the market. Of all of the letters I get from around the country, other parts of the world, the most common, not even a close race, but the most common, one way or the other, are inquiries regarding the nature of suffering. Which does happen to fit in, or I'm going to make it fit into the sorts of things of which we have been of late discussing. The nature of suffering, I'm aware from many ordinary views and some so-called extraordinary views, is of importance. Now, from any ordinary view, well, from all the views, let's swallow them all at once. All of the views, all attempts to analyze the nature of suffering, to discuss suffering, to come up with any idea of the basis of suffering or where it's going, what's the purpose. The whole thing, from all ordinarily conceived of views, all known views with which you're familiar, is based upon an initial flaw. That is, it does not take into consideration that you can suffer, you do suffer, in two different ways. And ordinary minds make no distinction between the two. It's not that hard to see, but they see no distinction, and if we're all lucky, and Noah and his family doesn't show back up with that rain dance, maybe before it's over, you can see how it's of use, as always, to understand something. You can suffer physically. You can suffer below the level of consciousness. Not speaking literally, of course, but the way I've been dividing up man for the sake of these discussions, at the biological, at the instinctive, at the physical level, for the time being discounting man's intellect. You can suffer there. That is the mother of all sufferings, to quote that famous Mideastern philosopher. Well, from all reports, no one to his face has told him he is not one. It is quite obvious you can suffer physically, biologically, instinctively, but let's say physically for the moment. That's where all physical pain obviously is. That's where all difficulties, that is where you die from. Anyone who wants to stay around and discuss the nature of physical suffering, it is not that they're in any way that unusual. It is very common, but they're not even close to anything resembling an understanding of life, because there is nothing to discuss. Once you can say to someone, if you had some reason to, or to yourself, you can say, I have a horrible, severe pain in my side. What is there to say after that? Nothing. Should it call for any additional suffering? Not unless you're ordinary. You should do something about it. Or a little more plainly, I'm sure you get it, but if you stepped on a large piece of broken glass and you went, damn, my foot hurts, you would pull it up and you would take the piece of glass and you would pull it out. What more is there to do? What more is there to say? Or you might be on your deathbed and say, by Jove, I believe I'm about to die. And within the final seconds that you are about to die, and you might be aware of the fact, well, I was right. But I mean, so what are you going to say after that? Well, yeah, that's it, I'm gone. There is, in spite of the fact, well, I want you to see the fact. It's not just not normally analyzed this way. But the whole thing about me bringing out bad news and etc. is still based upon conflict. The inherent nature of there being conflict everywhere there is duality. And man is the homeland, the heartland of duality. But ordinary people love bad news. From several views I've given you, and you can come up with your own version of it. But all of man's perceived existence comes from a non-recognized, at least under any consistent banner, unrecognized duality of his nature, and therefore duality itself. And where there is a duality, there is conflict. Forget, there is no exception. That's it. And so you've got conflict. In the same way that it's easy to hate attorneys in civil cases, because one side's always going to lose. What's a prime example, now that I think about it, as all of you know here at this particular time in history, nothing new, but attorneys right now in the Western world are undergoing a great deal of public flagellation about how poorly they're thought of. But anytime you have let's say a civil case, it's true in a criminal case, anytime you've got an case and you've got two attorneys, you've got two sides, a state against an individual, or two attorneys representing two individuals in a civil case, at the end of that day, let's say half the people, the families of plaintiff A are over here and defendant B. One guy suing somebody else for unlawful, or like for an automobile crash when their son was killed, or for great bodily harm done in an accident. At the end of the day, half the people walking out of that courtroom, at least half the two people involved, the defendant and the plaintiff, one of them is going to walk out thinking his attorney is a dunderhead. One of the advantages that the priesthood has over the practice of law is by the time not 50% of the people find out they've been hoodwinked and had the wrong representative, 100% of them find out they had the wrong one, but they can't complain. In the case of the practice of the law, the disgruntled client is still there alive right in front of your face. When the form of the jury says, yes, we find in favor of the defendant, the plaintiff immediately hates his attorney. All right, I'm getting around to something. That's just an example I thought might narrow it down, because I know it may sound, or it seems to strike people as a little vague, or they're uncertain to what I'm pointing to say that bad news is always more popular than good news, because life, when you look at it from a view, and you do not understand that your ordinary mental view is based on conflict, that is one part of a duality, and duality always produces conflict. They're one and the same. You cannot have a duality without conflict. Then, at best, half the news is always bad news. And it's even more than that. Well, it entails more than that. But I was trying to get you to see that the mind is attuned to, at very best, at the ordinary level, the ordinary people, at its very best, the mind is attuned to wanting to hear half the time sad songs, bad news, bad reviews of movies. It is attuned to it because, without being able to analyze it, in any given second, half of the books about to be reviewed in the New York Times, you don't know it yet, but half of them are going to be bad reviews. If suddenly a movie critic comes on a TV program and they said, and here it is, the review of the biggest releases this week, half of them will be bad. Half the news from abroad, the international news, will be bad. And half is a figure of speech. Well, it doesn't, the amount there cannot be quantified really. But all you got to do is notice what is the popular forms. What are the newspapers taken up with? What are television news programs taken up with? What are reviews taken up with? What is gossip about? Gossip itself, being the most common form of human entertainment throughout history, it would be oxymoronical to even say, is there good gossip? Because gossip itself, I believe the definition entails something negative. But can you even consider, even if it wasn't that way, do people gossip about good news? Does anybody go, psst? you know that guy, Fred in the office, that guy with the red hair that works at, yeah? Did you know he married? I just saw him. He married the most beautiful woman you ever saw, and he won the lottery this weekend. Or did you know I happened to be out in the same restaurant? We was waiting on some friends, and we just sat down. We had a cup of coffee and got to talking. I'd never been around him. That's one of the nicest guys, sharp as hell. I had no idea what a great guy he was. And the person, are you serious? You go, yeah. Oh, come on. No, I'm serious. Well, you understand. That's not the way it goes. Now back to suffering, more specifically. Without any doubt, you can suffer physically. You can also suffer mentally. The distinction is not made, and I know once I said that, we could have an ordinary mind respond to that and say, well, you're crazy, because if I did break my bone, if I did break a leg and it's hurt, I would go to a doctor. I know it's a physical, I'd say, well, I'm suffering. It really hurts. Maybe it's broken, and I would go to a doctor. I wouldn't go to a psychiatrist. I mean, I know I was out playing ball, and I remember the guy tackled me, and it hurt then. I know where I'm suffering, where it's coming from. But without those kind of very simplistic cases, which you know that is not normally what men sit around and whine, pine, opine, write, muse, rhapsodize about. Oh, my poor broken leg. No, when they talk about suffering, an ordinary man now, and especially the more sophisticated and educated he was at the ordinary level, the more he would be just shunning aside what I said, like, well, everybody knows that you suffer physically, you get hurt, you suffer. But yeah, that's not human suffering. And he's right. He's right. Because that's animal suffering. A man can suffer, at least physically. If we cut out right here and just say from here down in the body, a man suffers no more from a broken leg than an elephant would. He suffers. And so an ordinary mind would say, well, that's of no great consequence, because that is not human suffering. Come on, suckerfish. Come on. He'd say, all right, human suffering has to do with higher human emotions and human problems. That's human suffering by God. Come on in. I'm not going to throw you back. Yeah, I am. I don't want people like that in my boat. It's all a metaphor. And a smelly one at that. But there is no clear distinction kept in mind. There is certainly no understanding at the ordinary level of the connection between man's physical, instinctive survival self and his psychological, neurological, mental self. They are spoken of as being separate. They're not seen as having any functional connection. It continually pops up. Someone's always saying, well, I bet there is some connection. And if he's got a few degrees behind his name, somebody else will go, he's been working too hard. You know that's not true. Look at it this way. Try a new verbal pictorial. When it comes to suffering, or the matter of suffering, you can also look at it in a residential context, that there are two places, as us urban planners say, there are two places that you can stay at. So you don't have to major in English, or even minor in English to major in urban planning. There are two places you can stay at. One is, let's say you can stay with old Uncle Albert. Parenthetically here you might read instinct. You can stay with old Uncle Albert. And in this place everything is pretty simple. Over there everything is either basically okay or it's not. That's it. You can go over there and stay with him as much as possible. But you try to go there and stay over there with old Uncle Albert over his place. And just basically when you go over there everything's all right. I mean it's just okay. Or it's not. Read, you're either feeling all right or you're sick, physically. Or you could go over and stay with Auntie Elizabeth. Read. And over there, it seems like things are always in a state of agitation. If not, a downright uproar. It is no longer possible. Nobody should want to, but it is not possible to live simply in one or the other. Men are still driven without understanding to try to, which another bring up one of many people's favorite subjects, alcohol and drugs. That's one of the primary attractions to alcohol and drugs. One is a sophisticated, educated person who in the daytime works primarily over near Auntie Elizabeth's area. As soon as they get off from work, rush to a high-class Auntie Elizabeth type fern bar, watering hole down the street from the office, and immediately, internally, try to rush headlong as fast as possible to go visit old Uncle Albert. That they're attempting in a very crude fashion to regress, to narrow it down to where everything's either all right, as artificially, albeit as it may be arranged here, for the first 2 or 3 minutes, which is about all the alcohol is good for. God, that feels good. And then after that, you forget about how less good it's beginning to feel, but it's an attempt, in a sense, to escape the domain of Auntie Elizabeth, where everything is always just a little, to where at least at Uncle Albert, it's like there's a 50-50 chance that things are not agitated over there. Over there it's just pretty yes or no. It's pretty close to a win-lose game. It's pretty close to an in-your-face binary situation. Which beyond the pictures I said you can read simply physical. The reason I made up all this picture now is the mind does not generally make any such clear distinctions. And it certainly does not take into consideration the fact that thinking about, that is, you're living part-time, you got one foot over with Aunt Elizabeth, and you got one foot with old Uncle Albert. And over at Uncle Albert, if things are not well that day, it affects Aunt Elizabeth's terrain. That is, that humans, even though you're sick, even though if you have a broken leg, and this part over here, let's say, represents you physically, that broken leg hurts you no worse than it would a dog with a broken leg. A dog lacks one thing. It lacks the other realm, the other nature of the mind, wherein you can think about it. Poetically, this is known, it's no great secret again, such as people musing over the fact of how everything from how time speeds up if you are taking your wife to the dentist or your child to the dentist, and later that afternoon there's a good game on TV and you want to get back to it, the way the time seems to be that you're sitting there in the waiting room for him to be called in, and the difference between when it's your turn for root canal work and you get there, and how quickly time passes before they call you in. All the way from that to such good old axioms as a hero dies only once and a coward 1,000,000 times. Because what they're saying is, a variation of that is, the body gets sick and hurt. The body hurts once for each illness, whereas to the mind, it can milk 1,000,000 times out of it. That is, the dog's got a broken leg and it hurts X degree. A man's got a broken leg, it hurts the same amount. But what the dog lacks is the man can whine over it. The man can think about it. He can look and think, well, is it cracked? Is it broken? Will I have to be set? How much will it cost? How bad will it hurt for them to set it? Will they have to knock me out? How will I get to the hospital? Is my insurance going to cover this? Just on and on and on and on and on. And then, of course, he can whip himself over the stupidity of who did it to him, or better yet, it was partially my fault. So anyway, I was pointing out that people try in very crude ways through such things as alcohol, and in a lesser degree sometimes religion, but alcohol is easier to describe, that they are actually, if you see what I'm saying, they will leave the ordinary job of which they may speak highly in the morning, and generally, that they work for an advertising agency, they work for they're a software developer. I mean, it's something that's a real mental challenge during the day. But you understand, we're talking about Aunt Elizabeth's place, that everything is always in some state of agitation. Remember, compared to Uncle Albert over there, it's either things are generally all right, okay, or they're not. I mean, there just is no, it's just, okay, then you show up at Uncle Albert's, and there he is sitting on the porch, half asleep, and his feet propped up, and the spittoon there. And he may look at you, it's all right. I mean, what's the big deal? That's why I've tried to point out to you that from one real view, a more conscious man's attitude toward health should be, fuck health. You're either healthy or you're not. It's not a hobby. So there it is. Uncle Albert's things are either basically okay, no big deal, just okay, or they're not. You get there and Uncle Albert's bent over the railing and he's spitting up blood. And it's splattering on you, and you realize, well, this is not going to be, a pleasant visit here with old Uncle Al. As you wake up in the morning and you're spitting up blood, you understand the point is you're either all right, and if you're a little more conscious, health is just not a hobby. I mean, why be proud of being healthy? What's the deal? You're either healthy or you're not. It's like you're either dead or you're alive. You wake up in the morning and check the obituaries, and if your name's not there, get out of bed and go on about your business. One guy was amazed, I heard, that he went from the country to the city, and the thing that struck him most about the wonders of civilization was he found an obituary column. He had never seen one in the paper, and he looked at it and thought, and he went, my God, here people even die in alphabetical order. I'm sorry. That physically speaking, if you're talking about the realm of Uncle Albert, things are either basically okay or they're not. And so let's assume that you have a job. And basically okay, if you want to look at job-wise, let's say would be somebody in the laboring arts, construction arts, like a bricklayer. You just go to work, you lay brick, what is it? Once you know how. Or you're a nail driver. You pour concrete. Then let's take the person that's working in the daytime. Don't forget where we are, people before they go to the bar, people who may say that they truly love their job because it is a challenge. They work their way up, they studied, and they're in a real pressure cooker of an environment during the day. Advertising, sales, computer, anything that there is a challenge to, anything that's above the Uncle Albert level is going to be closer to this Aunt Elizabeth realm. And remember, I point out, over there, things are always, at least in a continuing state of low-level agitation. You do not show up at Aunt Elizabeth, and she is ever simply sitting on the porch with her feet propped up. I mean, when you get there, at best you can expect. The minimum is going to be that she's pacing up and down, and probably looking at her watch and smoking and all kind. It's all the way from that to just damn near chaos. But the minimal is a level of agitation. It never stops. That is what people unknowingly would refer to as speaking avocationally again, or vocation, would be a challenging job. And so they will work at it, work their way up to get it, speak highly of it, and they work at it 8 or 10 hours a day, and as soon as it's over, as soon as they can tear themselves away, they will rush, very common, they'll rush to ingest alcohol. And no matter what the description, I'm telling you the basis of it is, under those conditions, in this scenario, and it's not an unfair description under all scenarios of imbibling, but it's particularly in this one, what they are after is, they would even say things similar, as you know, they'll say, well, you know, the kind of pressures I'm under in my job, I mean, what's the big deal? I have a few drinks and it relaxes me. It does. But I'm telling you now, in the nature, or in the context of speaking of the duality of man between his instinctive self and his intellectual self, it is an attempt to drag one from the realm of the intellect and Elizabeth, where everything is at least slightly agitated continually, over to where at least half the time, so to speak, you get there to Uncle Albert's, the more you can get back to just the life of the body, the more you can, relatively speaking, the more you can get there, there's at least a 50-50 chance you'll get there and things are generally okay. But as is the nature of what I'm describing, also notice, as also reflected in the effect that alcohol has on ordinary drinkers. They always blame on something else. About half the time you do not get the calming effect that you expected. Generally half the time a guy goes, I'll have a drink and calm down. He has a couple of drinks and he's in a fight. Just generally speaking. That it is a gamble again. But it's a kind of on or off gamble, win or lose, the same as going over to Uncle Albert's. And so the point is, without them big game to analyze it, they leave the job. They can get away from the office now for the day's over. And this continual state of agitation, which is man's mental state. Remember, there is no such thing as a conclusive, satisfactory conclusion in man's intellectual life. It's only in the physical life. It's only there that there is anything resembling, well, it is satisfactory conclusions. That is, you're hungry, you eat. You're horny, you screw. You're tired, you go to sleep. And that's it. If you've got any sense, if you've got anything resembling sense, you do that, and that's it. You don't overeat, you don't oversleep. You do that, the body can be satisfied within a given context. The hunger of the stomach can be satisfied. It takes no sense. It takes no intelligence, no education. It takes some sense to realize, finally, that this thing at the ordinary level cannot be satisfied. That's the nature of it. But, not knowing that, all they know is that, relatively speaking, a man that's worked 8 or 10 hours there at this job, and the more it is a mentally based job, the more he is agitated. Because that is the nature of the mind. I mean, there he is in, let's say, advertising. You can't ever be satisfied. Satisfaction, like anything issuing from the mind, satisfaction is termination. It's the end of the company. You can't let a big client, XYZ Airlines, you can't let them say, boy, the campaign you guys did for us last year was so great, I don't think we'll ever advertise. Or, I don't think, we won't need you this year. We're going ahead of that same one. You've got to convince them. No, people get tired of it. If there doesn't seem to be the proper amount of agitation, you got to stir it up. You go, oh no, oh wait a minute, oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, CEO of XYZ Airlines. No, because that's a common misperception. And all your flunkies, everybody goes, yeah, that's common. And you go, in fact, I'm so glad you mentioned it, because one of our major clients several years ago, we did such a campaign. Do you remember the one we did of, Roomy the Clown and that pizza place? And they goes, yeah. And he said, they had their biggest year ever. They tripled their sales just based upon our campaign. And all your flunkies go, that's right. And he decided it went so good that he'd let it he wasn't going to change it. And before he knew it, because another company came in, you remember that other pizza place? And they made it a female girl from outer space instead of a clown, but based on our same ideas. I mean, it's obvious where they got it. And they suddenly took over. And they got a 60% share of the market, 42% of which earlier, a year before, had been the other pizza place. So, what you got to realize is, you cannot coast along. No, there's no such thing as that in the business world. Oh, it's a good thing you came to us. In other words, they have to stir up agitation when there apparently is none. You follow into this? So the man leaves his job after those hours there, and not untruthfully may make the comment, let's go get a drink. I got to calm down. But understand, through the 8 hours he spent there, being non-calmed down is a prerequisite for the job. It's a prerequisite. It doesn't have to be that kind of so-called psychological brain baker that drives people into a neuroses or an ulcer. But on a continuum spectrum, the more your job is in the intellectual realm, the more agitated you are. Just normally speaking, those of you that you got and dig ditches for a living, or if you drive nails, unless you've got other so-called psychological problems, which we'll eventually get to, I can take care of all those in about 30 seconds. But other than that, the point is, it's similar to alcohol, but I was just going to say, those who do such work as that for a living, if you're naturally wired up to be attracted to it, or just try to picture it in the theoretical third person. Just go by and see a guy out there digging ditches. You don't imagine that he has any great kind of psychological inner turmoil going on. Or conversely, I know that sounds theoretical, and someone could say, well, we don't know whether he does or not. Similar to booze, what do many people who don't drink or in conjunction with it, they will leave the job. There's been one of these kind of pressure cookers, this agitation, they will go immediately to a gym. Or on the weekends, what are their hobbies? They will even tell you, I love nothing more to get out there in the garden, get down my hands and knees in the dirt, and I don't have to think about a damn thing. Or I love to go out there and do carpentry work. I've been fooling around with a little shed I've been trying to build behind my house for like 3 years. I don't know anything about it, but I got there and I saw and I cut, and sometimes I don't even know what I'm doing, but at least I don't have to think about anything. It's the same thing. They're trying to get back to that world that I was calling Uncle Albert, the world of the body, the world that's instinctively based, wherein it is a even-eyed shooting match that half the time, even drinking for a little bit, you're going to feel better, feel a little less pressurized. And half the time at least, you got and do physical work and you do calm down. Or half the time you got and run a few miles. In those conditions, of course, compared to alcohol, the odds are greatly improved. But at least you understand there's a 50-50 chance. So people attempt to escape the agitation of the mental world. But they attempt it as a game of going, even a win-lose game, because the mind sees no continuation. It sees no inseparable connection between the two, other than the fact that they're both in your body, that your intellect's some way in your body, and so is your body in your body, but so what? What does that mean? I got psychological problems. That's not the same thing as a broken leg. No. So what I was going to say is, if you realize that there are two ways to suffer, just without any doubt, and after going through all that, I guess I could have some ordinary person hear that and go, well, big deal. It took 50 minutes to point that out. I knew that. A broken leg is a broken leg, and psychological problems are psychological problems. Well, yeah, sort of. But consider, if you take away all non-physical pains and difficulties, then what? Then what is the source of? What is the origins of all suffering? It did get a big laugh when I said that there was this one group of people in an alternative reality that came to a definitive finding as to the source of all psychological problems. And their finding was the mind, the mere existence of the mind. People do not realize, the ordinary mind does not realize that news item that I reported, that anywhere there is duality, there is conflict, anywhere, is an absolute fact. I can give you a continuing history, or a continuing example from the continuing history of man. Anytime you take, let's take people, make it simple. Anytime you have two groups of people, and when I say two groups of people, that the people themselves, they identify this one group. We've got group A and group B. And Group A identifies themselves as being separate from Group B, and vice versa. Okay? It doesn't matter what the separation could be, apparently based on race, nationality, religion, height, hair color, wealth, political affiliation, economic models. It does not matter what. But if you've got two groups of people, and they each identify themselves in some way, just in any way, as separate from the other group, and you put them side by side, it will eventually, if not quickly, but it will eventually, without any exception, result in conflict. Of course, there's no way I'm about to try to offer any kind of scientific proof, much less statistical proof. But if you think about it, the proof is in the reality of life. And what I was pointing out also is this is never taken into consideration. Contraire, those who pass for intellectuals at the ordinary level continue to wring their hands in grief over man's inability not just to stop the conflict, but they will oftentimes say is that we can't make the parties see the futility of their conflict. Now this is an outside observer, of course. A person from Group W that they bring over, he observes Group X and Y in this conflict. And they can, and they historically do it. And it passes oftentimes for very deep, erudite, psychological, historical commentary. You know, it can be even regarding current events. That some man will go into great detail, go over and spend several months in some war-torn area and try and take both sides of it. That he has no family in either X group or Y group, you know, whatever it is, whatever conflict. He seems to have had, he claims he had no particular interest in either side and their background before this conflict arose and took the world's eye. And he goes over and he spends months over here living with Group Y and Group Z. And he observes it all and he questions them, he ponders it, he reads their history, he writes, he meditates. And he says it is just inexplicable. I mean, I understand. I talk to the people, the educated, the good, the right-thinking people in Group Y, and they give me their view, and I can see, theoretically, I can see where they're coming from. Then I walk right over, get safe passage over to the other side, and I can sit down with their educated, humane leaders, and I'll discuss with them what's going on, and I can hear what they're saying, and I can understand theoretically their feelings in this matter. And yet, they're so close together. That's the most common one. They're both so close together. There's so little dividing them. Why can't they see it? Or better yet than just the quantity of the difference that it seems to divide them, is history and individual commentators continue to conclude or to define the foolishness, not just the amount, but the foolishness, the obvious one, or one of the obvious being religion. That we have two groups saying that they're fighting one another, killing one another on the basis the Group Y says their God said, well, listen, I want everybody to worship me because I'm the right God. And then Group Y says, well, no, oh, wait a minute. You know, I don't know who you're listening to, but we got the right God. We got the real God. And he tells us that you're wrong. And so an outside observer, that is someone who has no interest in either of these two religions, goes, this cannot be. How can they take something that they claim to be based upon a spiritual, humane foundation, and now they're killing one another? How can this be? And they want to pull their hair if they had any. I'm telling you how. It doesn't matter. In some fashion, the news item, I'll quote myself again, anywhere there is duality, there is conflict. Anywhere. And in one fashion or the other, ordinary minds will always see the situation as being somehow unnatural. Whereas those who are more conscious know better. It doesn't matter what the apparent basis of the conflict is. It doesn't matter what the observable fabric of the conflict is. It makes no difference. Do you understand? I mean, well, you will understand. That's rhetorical. Once you see that anywhere you have duality, if you put two groups of separate people, different people, by their observation, which is all it takes, and you put them side by side. So here's you here's you a plot of land, all you people live here, you Y people, and here, all you X people, you move right here, this is yours. And you put them there. They will ultimately be in conflict. There are no exceptions. The only exception is one of the groups dies out or moves. If they stay there, side by side, they will, without any doubt, there is no exception, they will come in conflict. The fact that man has an X and a Y side inside, that is the conflict. The futility of it is looking for, or the futility of it is denouncing it, because the futility of it simply evidences your lack of understanding. But also notice, everything from religion to psychology could be considered expert professional views, but also down to an individual view. Religion and psychology expect, they proclaim, but they expect that one of the two should triumph in all dualities. Religion, obviously, and civilized people, but religion, without any doubt, they proclaim the fact that the whole purpose of life is the purpose of religion. But they admit, they proclaim that, yes, there's two natures to man. The great good nature, the great good possibility, and the evil. Or that he is simply the conduit, he is simply the battlefield upon which the battle between good and evil is played out. But yes, one must triumph. Psychology says the same thing. Yes, man has misunderstood, unconscious motivations, childhood traumas, forgotten abuse that he has suffered, and that is in conflict with his conscious mind, what he thinks is motivating him, what the plans that he does consciously make, and that one of them must triumph, or man will never be well. He will never be psychologically healthy. In the same way that religion says, well, a man will never be godlike. He will never have reached his full potential until one side triumphs over the other. It will not happen. But that's part of what keeps it going, is that man in general goes, yes, well, it must triumph. Yes, I understand. We should all be in favor. When everybody say, yes, good must triumph, and if anybody turns your way and looks, by God, shake a fist and say, right on, brothers. Hey. Or no, I always get it backwards. I guess that's why I'm so little seen in Italy, because I keep getting these. Well, it's not a matter of triumph. I'll pick it up there next time. Yeah. What if I'm not accidentally getting them backwards?